Nice. Hello, everyone. I recognize that a friend of mine, actually more like a brother who's since passed away, bought me some lighting when I first said I wanted to start doing videos. So I found the lighting. So I have it in the background. It's not set up really well. I gotta find a spot. Um, I'm gonna come with another video, give you more of the history of what it was like to grow up in the 1970s and 80s. I'm probably going to be in some kind of more unstable housing soon. I've had stable housing for about 3 or 4 months. That's good. But the voucher program is not paying, so we'll see. Uh, we'll probably move into something else. So when I move on after this video, we're going to start getting into my life in the projects. That's where all the shit hits the fan. That's where you really become an adult, forced to make really I don't want to say hard decisions, but really concrete decisions about what kind of human being you're going to be. And most people in the projects become subhuman because it's rewarded. But we'll get into that when I get to that point. But in this video, so I told you about 1082. It was a slumlord. We left that place and went into a shelter. Now it was 5 of us. So they had to find us a shelter with that family stayed in. So we ended up staying at a shelter for battered women, battered families. And we stayed for a maximum 3 months. And the only reason we stayed in the shelter, this is how different the shelter system was back in New York City, late 70s, early 80s. The latest you could stay was 3 months. They got you in and out because we had a lot of New York City housing, NYCHA. We had a lot of units. And what they would do is, if you were homeless, because remember we had a social worker that helped us with to get our landlord to pay. We went to back then what they call now HRA, what was called the Social Welfare Department. They had all the list of housing there. There was no extra department anywhere else, and all the list of the shelters there. Everything was there, and so they put us in the shelter that fit us. And then from the shelter, we went to the projects. But I remember being in the shelter for battered women. There's a few lessons. One, I remember Ken Peaks. He was a social worker that we all had to go see. Because this was a shelter for battered women, he was a mental health provider. But we had to go see him as a family too. And my mother had to talk to him by herself. She had meetings, and then the children. Then I would go, and he taught me. He was English. Had the greatest accent. He kind of reminds us of Benny Hill. We used to laugh all that he looked like Benny Hill, but he taught me how to play backgammon. He taught me how to play chess. And we would just play the game. He had an office in the projects that was next door to this shelter. There was a projects next door and a school right behind it. And you would go down in the basement of the projects, and all the doors would be open, and you would go down, and they had a room. This is back when you had community rooms and community centers that was actually used for the benefit of the community. All went away. I mean, because the people who lived in the communities just let everything go. We'll get into that too. So he taught me how to play chess and backgammon. Then he left, went back to England from what I remember. So he left about maybe 2 months in. So we were there. That was one good lesson. Another lesson is there was a family that was larger than us, had a lot of children. And one of the children, he was a teenager. He was a, what do you call it, pyromaniac? So he would set the fires. And one day I was in the office for something, and he was staring at the bulletin board that had all these papers on it. He was staring at it. And then he went over to it, and the woman in the room said, "You better not set my damn board on fire." And he started laughing and ran out the office. This is what it was. They couldn't find this family an apartment to live in because of him. So what they ended up having to do is give them a whole house to themselves because of his issue. They didn't want him burning down the building and making other people homeless. I don't know what happened to them. I mean, there was rumors that eventually, later down the line, he set a fire, but I don't know. There was three people my age we used to hang together. It was me, Wesley, and this white kid who came in there with his mom and his two brothers. And Wesley and his mom went back to his father because the father had to go to counseling. What happened with them is I think they got into one fight. And then she moved out and went to a shelter. She didn't let it escalate. And then the father had to go to extra counseling. And then they had to go to group counseling to see if it would work. But eyes was on him. Beautiful mother. I think the kid's name was Wesley, if I remember right, the black kid. So we would hang out with this white kid, and his mother I remember she had 2 black eyes permanently. She came in there. And this white kid was so angry. I remember going up to the apartment one time, and because this was it was like being in a 3-story, 4-story walk up. And there was like newspapers on the floor. And because we would go pick each other up to go for walks. And he told her, he asked if she wanted something from the store or something like that. And she was just staring into space. His brothers used to run around with their drawers on, out in the hallway sometimes. They would have to catch them and bring them back. So she was just abused and just out of it. And I remember looking at that like, whoa, man, looking at some of these women like, damn. And then again, so already I'm making decisions in my mind. So now I'm like 11 years old. I'm like, I'm never going to hit a woman. Ever. This is what happens. So again, when you're impoverished, you're forced to become these kinds of things, to make these kind of decisions. Okay, well, what am I going to be? What kind of person am I going to be? If you're thoughtful, and I was always thoughtful. So, and I know people say they're never going to hit a woman, but I always think back to those times and that woman being beat up with the black eyes. Other women, black women were tougher, but you can see the effect of the abuse. You can pick it up. I mean, your children pick up more about your lives than you think they do. Trust me. So, we got him. The apartment was messy. His brothers was running around their drawers. It was dingy. And we went for a walk. And I remember me and the other black kid, we walked him a long time. We went walking. This was Lower Manhattan, where the shelter was. So all the other people in the neighborhood used to call it the Castle. I don't know if that's the name of it. I remember it being the Henry Street Settlement. But when I look up the Henry Street Settlement now, it doesn't look like the building we lived in. So I'm not sure. But I know there was a school right behind it. You can look out my back window and see through the back window of the school, of a classroom, or the window of a classroom. So we walked over some bridges and to the park, and we kept him out a good time because we knew he was angry, and we just hung out, kept him away from the shelter, and we were walking around maybe for 3-4 hours. It's interesting. We were like 11 years old, 3 boys, and we were just walking. Our parents didn't really know where we were, but we were taking care of each other. We were helping each other. Now, I don't know if you can do that today. There's so many predators out. And there seems to be such a premium on children being snatched with such regularity. It's insane. But this is what it was like back then. You could still Well, this is pre-crack era. So we stayed out for about 2, 3 hours, kept him away from the place and tried to bring his spirits up. And I didn't have any brothers. I had all sisters, but I wondered, damn, this is what having a brother would be like, you know? But it was cool. Uh, and that was some of the things that I remember most about being in the shelter. And we were there for about 3, 4 months. Um, I think we stayed more than the 3 months, or we stayed at the 3 months. I feel like we stayed at the 3 months and then we was gone. And we moved into the projects. And the first thing I looked up at the projects, I was scared to death. Now, remember, the only reference we have for projects is Good Times. And in Good Times, the projects is just terrible. So, and the tallest building I had ever lived in was a 3-story building. So I'm going to Prospect Plaza, 15-story building, a 12-story building, and across the street a 12-story building, in the middle of the 15-story, which I was going to live in, and the 12-story between 1786 and 1750, because 86, 50, and then 1765 was across the street. There was a basketball court in the park and a little thing behind 1786. So that was my introduction to the projects. And I'll tell you later about the bullying, the jumping people, the violence. Imagine, I'm coming from a shelter for battered women where they're trying to work to stop violence. And I'm coming to the projects where there's violence. So I'm seeing what violence can do and making promises to myself not to be so violent, and then thrust into this position where I'm going to have to be violent. And everybody around me is forcing me to be violent. The people who love me most is telling me to be a man, you have to be violent. And we'll get into that story next. It's rough. Until then, take care of yourselves and be safe.